Thank you.
Welcome, everybody. Since we have a smaller group today, if you guys want to chime in with questions as Sara is talking, I think that is fine. We can make this an interactive session today. I'm going to introduce our second bassoon, Dr. Sara Fruehe. She just defended her dissertation. I didn't have time to update the Facebook event, but I wanted to put the DR dot right in front of her name. So she'll be sharing the bassoon with us today. So I'm going to hand it off to Sara and let her tell us a little bit about herself.
Yeah. So thanks, Sammy. So we've been talking actually since like everyone has joined. So I feel like you all have gotten to know me just a little bit. As Sammy said, yes, I did just finish my degree at IU, graduated literally a week ago, but it's not my only degree from IU. I also have an undergrad bassoon performance as well, which I got in 2009. And then I kind of went back home to the Chicagoland area and I got my master's in 2011 from DePaul University there at their Lincoln Park campus. Bassoon was not my first instrument. I actually started playing the flute when beginning band was offered in our middle school level, about 3rd or 4th grade or so. And then by 8th grade, I was looking for something different and stumbled across the bassoon, and here we are today. So yeah, we're going to talk about the bassoon. Let's see if I can do the screen share. This is what I want to share. Okay, can everybody see a PowerPoint?
Yes.
Awesome. Okay. Sorry, I've got all these different windows open, just making sure I can see everything. So I made just a little agenda of like what we'll talk about. First will be the organology. So just a brief history of the bassoon. We're looking at like over 250 years. So it is kind of a Cliff Notes version of things. And then I want to introduce you to the modern bassoon. And then I've got some performance, some kind of musical offerings of noted excerpts and a solo. And instead of questions and answers kind of at the end, as Sammy said, let's just talk. Let's just make this interactive and a nice conversation. So when we talk about the bassoon's history, this is a little difficult. The early history of the bassoon, it can be rather ambiguous and a little obscure. What information we do know about the bassoon's precursors primarily comes from iconography, so a lot of picture evidence rather than written documents. What written information we do know, what we do have, it can be kind of unreliable. And a lot of this has to do just with inconsistencies in the terminology and the nomenclature. But it's typically agreed that the Dulcian, also called a kurtal, is really the precursor to the bassoon. So this is where we're going to start, is with the Dulcian. And I've got it pictured here on the slide for you. The Dulcian, its prominence was between the mid-16th century to the 1700s, and it was made from a single long piece of wood that was hollowed out with 2 parallel bores. So one bore went downwards, increasing in diameter, and it actually starts, can you see my mouse? It kind of started here. So this would be the smallest part of the bore, and then it would travel down, progressively getting a little bit larger, and then it will loop, and it goes all the way back up, still increasing in size. So this kind of doubling on itself, kind of folding in half, and this kind of cone shape, the canonical shape, this is actually the basis of our modern bassoon. So this comes back. The widest part here of the bore, this is what we call a bell, and here on the Dulcian, it's a way to help amplify the sound. And in order to play it, you also need a metal pipe that would be inserted into the narrowest part. So here we have this metal pipe, and then this gets inserted into the bore here. And then we have a double reed that gets attached to the end of the metal pipe for the Dulcian player to blow into and to make a sound. The Dulcian, we said it was one big piece hollowed out, and it has 6 tone holes on the front of the instrument. And see if we can try to point them out. So we have 1, 2, 3, and then it's kind of hard in this picture, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And these were for the 3 fingers on each side of the hands. We also have 2 thumb holes on the back of the instrument that our thumbs would use. And then we have 2 keys. In this picture, one of the keys you can't see, it's on the back side of the instrument, and that's for a low D. And then we also have the low F key, which is right here. And we also call this the swallow's key, or the swallow's tail. The shape of it, as you can tell, kind of goes off in both sides. And this actually allowed for the Dulcian to be played on either side of the body. So either with the left hand on top and the right hand on bottom, or you flip it and it's the right hand on top and the left hand on the bottom. So I believe mostly performer preference of which side of the body that the Dulcian would go on. The Dulcian is actually from a family, a different variety of, comes in lots of different sizes, all the way from soprano, it's easier to see in this picture here, all the way down to a contrabass. And these different sizes, they allowed for playing in a variety of ranges and a variety of keys. The Dulcian family of instruments, these were often used to support choirs, and particularly the bass Dulcian, which we also call the choriste fagot, was probably the most useful and enjoyed kind of special status amongst all of the different size Dulcians. The choriste fagot, it had about a 2-octave range, and it really inspired a number of composers to write some virtuosic pieces. So I have a video and audio sampling of a replica Dulcian. So this is a sonata Sopra la Manica by Bodecker. So let's take a listen to a Dulcian. All right.
Super interesting, because the bassoon is often, you know, a bass instrument, kind of a contra instrument. It was almost a solo instrument in that case.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, yes. And so that's it's very, I love this sonata. It's actually can be quite challenging on the modern bassoon as well, but I'm just very appreciative of the composers of the time that really just saw the potential for even such a bass instrument like this to be able to go ahead and write something so virtuosic. Absolutely. So we're talking about the Dulcian. It's a 1-piece instrument, and this will really kind of help spur the creation of a multi-jointed instrument, specifically a 4-jointed instrument, which we will go on to label as the bassoon. So kind of as a point of distinction, when we're talking terms, when we say Dulcian, we do mean a 1-jointed instrument or a 1-jointed body. And then when the term bassoon is used, it's used to imply an instrument of 4 wooden joints, whether the term bassoon is kind of paired with Baroque bassoon, classical bassoon, or modern bassoon. So just an important distinction when we're talking history-wise. Let's see. So it's not exactly clear when or where, or really how, the evolution kind of creation of the 4-jointed bassoon takes place. But we start to see some iconography of multi-jointed instruments kind of around the end of the 17th century. And we also see these coexisting with the Dulcian. So we're starting to see a blend of kind of old technology and new technology. These instruments, again, just, coexisting at the same time. And we can actually see here, we've got an engraving. This is by Christoph Weigel in 1698. And the instrument maker here is holding our Dulcian. And we can see here, this is our now four-jointed bassoon. And it's because we're not exactly sure when the bassoon actually came onto the scene. We know that the Dulcian was an inspiration for a four-jointed instrument, kind of the design and the setup, but we can mostly just kind of speculate the demands of why we're now switching over into a four-jointed instrument, why this is coming onto the scene. There starts to be a need for a greater range and a larger range, specifically more key areas. As we talked about with the Dulcian, we had very little keys, just a few tone holes. So this kind of limited the range and the key areas that could be played. And then there was a need for a more sophisticated bass woodwind sound and better sound quality. So these kind of three things were the big impetuses to really just kind of help you kind of develop into a four-jointed instrument. As you break down the Dulcian into multiple joints, one of the kind of benefits of this is allowing for a better boring, more precision when it comes to each joint. You not have to bore for as long, each joint becomes a little bit smaller. So that's one of the kind of the benefits that helped in kind of the acoustical properties of the instrument. Just more, just better boring helped with that.
Betsy had a question in the chat. Who named the bassoon?
So the bassoon actually, I'm not really too sure on the etymology of the name bassoon itself, but the bassoon actually derives from the term fagot, and fagot translates to a bundle of sticks. So it's kind of this idea that like when you needed a case, they didn't make cases the way that you have instrument cases now. So you've got this four-jointed bassoon, you tie it up in a sack, you kind of throw it over your shoulder, and you've got a bundle of sticks. That's how I learned it. Is that's why we call it that. Bassoon is kind of more the Englandized, the English term for what we say fagot. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a great question. Okay, let's see. So we didn't jump from the Dulcian all the way to our modern bassoon. As I mentioned a little bit earlier, it takes hundreds of years for us to get from the Dulcian or a four-jointed instrument all the way to the modern bassoon. So we're going to explore the next step, which is that four-jointed instrument now. This instrument really saw development in the time of Louis XIV in France, specifically by the Haute family. And they were a family of brothers who were all wind players and inventors, and they were makers of other wind instruments. And notably, Nicholas Haute, he was the bassoonist in the family. He played for the Royal Chapel. I believe he began there in like 1668 or so. And he was the first identifiable bassoon maker from the Haute family. At the end of the 17th century, so we're thinking 1670s, 1680s now or so, we actually start seeing the term bassoon in scores. And this is a big deal, very big deal. Because at this time in the Baroque era, it was not common that the bassoon was actually labeled, but it was common practice that a bassoon would be present. Sometimes it would just be kind of lumped into a continuo section. Specifically, if oboes were present, there most likely would be a bassoon involved. And sometimes the bassoon would actually be referred to as a bass oboe. So you can't, be specific to, if it was a bass oboe, was it actually a bass oboe, or are we actually thinking of bassoon? So the fact that around this time, the bassoon actually starts getting labeled within a score, it's just a big deal, very important in the timeline development of the instrument. Most noticeable French composers, opera composers who started using the bassoons in their score was Jean-Baptiste Lully and Jean-Philippe Rameau. So we start seeing them in their scores around this time. And also in around the 1680s, we see the third key being added to the instrument, and this is a low B flat. Did I hear someone? I think, was there a comment? Okay, I'll move on. In addition to the Hochetiere family, there was another notable instrument maker at the time was J.C. Denner. Sammy is a clarinetist. Denner is a big deal in the clarinet organology. So he was an
He's considered the inventor of the clarinet. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So, but Denner got word. He was based in Nuremberg, correct? Please correct me if I'm wrong, Sammy. I think he was based in Nuremberg, and he kind of got word of Hochetiere's developments and his design, and he started copying this and kind of infusing the French pattern into his model. Now,
I was going to just say J.C. Denner took the chalumeau, which was kind of the precursor to the clarinet, modified it to make the clarinet, so I can kind of see the influence there. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I should say that like the development of the bassoon, probably just like many other instruments, they're not uniform at this time from city to city, region to region, or country to country. And it's simply just because, you know, the information, how it made its way around during this time, the rate it was shared or experienced, it was a little slow. That's okay. But to kind of help with flow of conversation for today, so we're not getting bogged down in the specifics of this country's development, this area's development. We're going to focus more on like the next technological developments as we go into the 18th century. And during this time, it's key work. Key work is big. There's not much, but it's what we got. So in the, let's see, around 1700 or so is when we see the fourth key added, and this is the G sharp. And the addition of this key really helped us solidify which side of the body the bassoon would be played on. So as we recall from the Dulcian, we had that swallow's tail, and, you know, basically the Dulcian performer had their option of which side of the body. Was it the left hand on top and the right hand on bottom, or is it flip-flopped? Well, when we add the fourth key, and you can kind of see it in the picture here, see the second key right here, we still have a swallow's tail. They're still keeping that shape, but the addition of this key just really kind of helped to cement that, all right, now this bassoon needs to be placed on the right side of the body, so it's on the right hip, so then the right hand's on the bottom. So the swallow's tail and that G sharp key can be played by the pinky, and we've got the left hand on top. And so kind of around this time, the early 1700s, we still have that three-keyed instrument, and we have now this four-keyed instrument. These would have been the bassoon that Baroque composers such as Vivaldi or Telemann or Beaumortier that they were writing for. So I have a audio clip of a Beaumortier duo they want to take a listen to. All right, so that's our early precursor, our three-key, four-key bassoon. All right, as we kind of keep moving into the 18th century a little bit there in the early 1800s, we're going to get a few more keys. We're going to get the E flat key, we're going to get the F key, we're going to get a couple of vent keys for A and C. And these vent keys just kind of help put you into like the next level of the octave. So by these early 1800s, we now have a 6-key model with our 2 vents, and this becomes the standard. In general, these technological or instrument development advances, these are kind of small in comparison to what other instruments around the time were experiencing. So again, as we're turning to the 19th century, all of a sudden, poor bassoonists, they're being asked to do a whole bunch more with what they have. So the demands that we start seeing that are being placed on the bassoon relate to technique, expression and range, virtuosity, sound production. Our ensembles start getting larger, our concert venues start getting a little bit larger. And at the same time, we start seeing an increase in international trade. So international trade and like exhibits that are happening around, this is just really encouraging a lot of competition and experimentation with our instrument makers as they're starting to see a little bit more about what everybody's doing. The big turning point for the bassoon, this comes in 1817, when bassoonist and instrument maker Karl Ammenreder, who unfortunately I don't have a picture of, so he's not included on this slide. In 1817, he meets famous acoustician Gottfried Weber, who we have pictured here. And it's also around the same time that he starts working in the Schott factory. So today, Schott is actually a publishing house, but back in the 19th century, Schott actually was an instrument maker factory producing instruments. So Karl Ammenreder, he's working in this factory and he's kind of starts to experiment and to improve and to like reform and kind of test out his ideas on the assembly line. They're working on the bassoon. Ammenreder would go on a couple of years later in 1823 to write a treatise and kind of subsequent articles talking about perhaps, you know, maybe we can move some keys around, maybe we could relocate others, maybe we could improve intonation and, you know, response of certain notes. So he started kind of this like think tank of things that we could do to improve the bassoon. And everything comes together in 1831 when Ammenreder joins forces with Johann Adam Heckel, who we do have pictured here. So everything comes together when these two join forces to create their own bassoon factory in Weibrecht. We have the vision of Ammenreder, we have the acoustical know-how of Weber, and then we have the production means that Heckel is able to provide. And basically this collaboration and the creation of the factory just really allows for a refinement of different aspects of the bassoon. One being the inner bore of the bassoon, we start to also see new keys being added and even secondary keys. And these secondary keys actually have rod that go from the front to the back of the bassoon. And I can try to show you a little bit when we look at the modern bassoon. And then also they work on relocating and resizing of tone holes. So by the time we get to the mid 1800s, we're now at a 16 and a 17 key bassoon, and this becomes the norm. Ammenreder goes on to publish, he goes on to keep building instruments all the way up until his death in about 1846. And at this time, Heckel continues in the development of the bassoon, as well as two more Heckel generations. And their kind of lineage, their family line of Heckel instruments, this is what kind of becomes the model of the bassoon. They've been able to refine the bassoon so much that this is the model that other instrument makers start modeling their systems off after. I should stop at this point and kind of clarify that the Heckel system or the Heckel bassoon, this is what we consider as the German model or the German system. And as we're coming into the 20th century, this German system is what starts to dominate the field, but it is not the only system. The other important system to note is actually a French system. And this was first created by the Buffet-Crampon company. And the French system was much quicker to develop than the German system. By 1879 or so, the French system had already had 22 keys, and it was established at that point as the standard for the French system. The French and the German systems, they share the same range, but the French system is known to have greater facility or greater ease in the extreme tenor or the extreme upper registers, where the German model is kind of stereotypically has a richer, kind of easier facility in the lower register. The fingerings between these two systems, like the notes that you open or close between the two systems, they're not the same. And it's not really common these days for bassoonists to learn both systems, but it's not out of the realm of possibility. So I want to return to the German system, and as now we're shifting into the 20th century, I want to talk about the modern bassoon a little bit. So I'm going to stop doing a screen share because I want to show you my instrument. I'm going to put it together here for you.
I had no idea that Buffet did bassoons.
Yes, and I believe it was just 6, 7, 8 years ago that they actually stopped production.
Okay. Wow.
So I don't think, yeah, I don't think they're producing instruments anymore. I believe the Paris Conservatory still does teach both systems. There is a bassoonist based up in Canada, Gerald Corey, who's no longer with us. He actually would play. He learned both systems and he would switch off between them depending on the repertoire that was being performed in the orchestra that he played with. But it's not, I would feel 100% confident in saying it's not common to learn both systems, but it is, again, it's not out of the realm of possibility.
So you only learned the German?
I did, yes, the German system. Sorry, I feel a little distracted. My cat has woken up from his nap and now he's hanging out with us a little bit. So if he comes onto the screen, just, wave and say hi. Louis might be present with us here this afternoon. Okay, so when we talk about the bassoon, it is, I can't recall if we talked about this earlier, but the bassoon is a woodwind instrument. It's in the woodwind family. So we actually sit right next to Sammy in the orchestra. And within the woodwind family, we are actually subclassified as double reed instruments. We share this classification with the oboes, which is kind of interesting because the instruments are kind of nothing alike. The reeds look nothing alike. The fingering systems are nothing alike. What we do share in common is that we are canonical instruments. So we talked about, when we talked about the Dulcian, we talked about the Baroque bassoon, we talked about that the bore of the instrument starts smaller and it kind of shapes out like a cone. So we do have that in common. And we also play double reeds. Our reeds look a little bit different. So let me see if I can zoom in here a little bit. This is what a bassoon reed looks like. And if I can kind of turn it, you can kind of see that there's two sides of it. And when we make these, we start off with a single piece of wood. We do some processing. We end up like folding it on itself. We wrap it with some wire and some thread. We do a little woodwork, a little whittling, and then fingers crossed it plays. So this reed is made out of, it's kind of like, I don't want to say it's exactly like bamboo, but it grows very similar. It grows hollowed out. It's called a rhododendron. And yeah, it comes in all different stages of processing depending on how early in the process you want to begin working on it. So in addition to the reed, the bassoon is built out of 4 parts, just similar how we talked about that transition from the Dulcian into what we were talking about, the 3 and the 4 key instrument. That's our Baroque bassoon. So we still only have 4 wooden joints. It is made out of maple wood. This is a softer wood in comparison to what the clarinets or the oboes instruments might be made out of. There was a period of experimentation, instrument makers, where they would use maybe a boxwood or a rosewood. Ultimately, that kind of phased out and maple became the premier wood of choice. My instrument actually is made out of a Yugoslavian wood that was harvested and laid to rest for about like 25 years, which is kind of special to me because my family's from former Yugoslavia. So it's kind of nice, like all kind of comes full circle. So I've got my instrument laid out here. So I'm going to pick up joints and we're going to talk about them a little bit. And the first joint I want to introduce you to is the boot. So this is the boot. This is the bottom of the instrument. So this is kind of like if you were to place it on the floor, this is what we get placed on the floor. These are our tone holes. These are 2 of our 3. Our 3rd tone hole for the right hand, that got eventually replaced. And so now we have a key for it. But if I turn it on its side, let's see if you can see the different shaped kind of bore. So on this side, you can see on the inside how small that is. And then on this side, a little bit larger. So it is that cone shape and it's a very long taper. It's a very kind of slight degree of increase as the bore goes down. Something to kind of note with this instrument, it's the bottom of it, that bend that we call underneath this cap. I can't take it off because it's so stiff and I don't know if I'll be able to get it back on, but it's actually like a U-tube. So kind of think like under your sink, kind of like plumbing, that loop bend. That's kind of what it looks like underneath this cap. Is just like a nice little U-bend. There's water sealant in there. There's a foam, there's cork in there and things to kind of help keep the water at where it needs to be. The next joint, this is the tenor joint. And this is the joint that we play with our right hand. And so we've got the tone holes here. We've got our 1, 2, 3. This tone hole over time, it kind of comes with a key kind of depressed in it a little bit. And you can kind of see the shape of it. It kind of flares out a little bit. It's not completely round. This flare on the tenor joint, sometimes because of it, we'll sometimes call it the wing because it's flapping a little bit. So we got this wing. And something to note, because this flare is super important because the tone holes on the bassoon, they are oblique. So this means instead of like the tone hole going straight through, the tone holes are at an angle. So I'm gonna put one joint down and see if I can show a little bit. You can kind of see how the angle, how they're kind of slanted. So this tone hole will go up, this tone hole goes down, and this tone hole goes down. So the wing is really important because it allows us to actually reach the tone holes. Without this wing, without this flare, this kind of plateau, there's no human who could have the hand span to actually reach the tone holes in order to cover to play the bassoon. So this wing is super important. And as we get assembled, I'm just going to assemble the bassoon as we talk. So that smaller side is where I'll go ahead and insert the wing. And I've got my stand here, so I'm just going to prop that up for a little bit. The next joint is our long joint. It's called that because it is by far the longest. And there's not a lot of keys on this one, and this is for the left hand. So we've got left hand thumb keys and left hand pinky keys. And that's
how many thumb keys do you have? Because it's a lot.
We have a lot of thumb keys. Let's see. In total, my bassoon, or like in general? My bassoon, let's see. I have, let me count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10. I have 10 on the left hand, and I have 5 on the right hand. So you can see, so my left hand thumb will play all of these guys. Here, let me lock the bassoon real quick and I'll feel better about showing this. Here we go. So my left, I'm sorry, what?
I don't envy you.
So the left hand, yeah, so my left hand here plays these 10 guys, and then my right hand down here plays these guys. However, I was actually going to talk about this. You're jumping me to the point here. I actually had a key removed. So there could actually be 11 keys on here if I wanted. A lot of it, when we talk about the modern bassoon, we talk about the number of keys. On the German system, there can be anywhere between like 22 to 29. And a lot of those, you know, some of them are just extras. And that was actually one of the keys that I had removed, was an extra. It was getting in the way of me doing some low technique, and I just got rid of it. I still have it. I can have it put on at any time, but I don't need it. This little key, this little guy up here, he's an extra. He's a trill key to kind of help out. Same thing with this guy down here. He's kind of layered on top of a couple other keys. He's a little extra. Very helpful, very useful, so I'll take it. The next part of the bassoon is the Belle. Not much going on here. We've got one key. This lets us play our low B flat, and it just goes on top of our long joint. And as we saw in the Dulcian, and as we saw as the Baroque bassoon, we saw the performers as they're playing, they also had a metal piping that went into the small receptor of the bore. We have that too. It's called a bocal. Some folks might also call it a crook. A lot of English folks will use that term, a crook, because it's crooked. And then that just gets inserted into the receptor here. The last piece that we use to play the bassoon is basically just something to help us hold it. It can be very heavy. So we'll use either like a seat strap or a harness. So I'm sitting on a seat strap where this cup, so the boot of the bassoon will just go in here and kind of help displace the weight, make it a little bit easier and not so heavy to play. So we talked about the keys already a little bit and like all of those kind of extras, but something we didn't talk about is the length of the bassoon. So the total length of the bassoon here, like when you start and go all the way back up, let's see if I can back up and get the whole thing in the picture for you. So we're looking at about 8 feet 4 inches or so of piping. And when you stand it up, it comes up to my shoulder. So we're just at just shy of 4.5 feet or so when it's standing. Yep. Just a lot of air you got to blow through the instrument. Let's see. Okay, so I want to go back to the slides if that's okay, because I have kind of some like fun facts about the bassoon. Let's see, can I do? All right, everyone seeing the two systems again? Awesome. Okay. So just a few kind of fun facts about the bassoon. The bassoon is an instrument in C. It is non-transposing. So this means like whenever we're looking on the page, whatever notes that we're reading, if it says C, that's the sounding pitch that it's going to make is C, which is a little bit different than some of our other woodwind colleagues in the clarinet section or English hornist, sometimes some of our brass members. They see a note on the instrument and it sounds something completely different. The bassoon has a 2.5 octave range, and I have it listed there for you. Low B flat, that's our B flat 1 in bass clef, and we can play all the way up to an F5 in treble clef. So this is about a 2.5 octave range. I'm going to try to play a chromatic scale for you all. I've been talking now for a little bit, so I'm a little cold, but I want you to hear the full range of the bassoon. So I think now is when I need to change. Do I need to change over, Sammy?
Yeah, change your sound over so it's your original sound.
Okay. How do I do that from the screen share?
If you need to, you can stop sharing your screen.
Yeah, I think let's stop that. Okay, original sound is on. So this is just a chromatic scale just to show the full 2.5 octave range.
Yeah.
Yeah, I get a little red in the face. It takes a lot of air to do that. Okay, I'm going to share one more time just so you can see what I'm talking about next. Okay, so we talked about range. Within that range, the bassoon is expected to play within 3 clefs. So we play in bass clef, we play in tenor clef, and we also play in treble clef. And I've got notated on the screen, this is actually the same note, same sounding pitch. This is our middle C, that middle C on the piano, the C4. But it looks a little bit different in every single one of these clefs. And we change clefs a lot. Dare I say sometimes we're a little prima donna about it. It just makes things easier to read is really what it is. As we get higher into that really high register, when moving to tenor clef, it's less ledger lines to read. Moving into treble clef, a lot of French composers like writing in treble clef because we talked about with that French system that the French bassoon can play really well. It has a lot easier facility up there. So treble clef it's just something that's kind of come synonymous, especially with a lot of our French conservatory pieces. We'll be doing a lot of reading in treble clef. In addition to the bassoon, especially as we're talking about range, we do have an auxiliary instrument, and it is the contrabassoon. Unfortunately, I don't own a contrabassoon, but I wanted to show it to you. So this is a picture here of it, about double in length, and you can see it wraps on itself multiple times. It just wraps, and the bell kind of shoots out here. And I have a recording of it that I want to share with you. The bassoon, it's the bassoon and the contrabassoon. They're non-transposing. You know, there's instruments in C. You can consider the contrabassoon a transposing instrument because whatever note that it sees on the page, it sounds 1 octave lower. So a lot deeper voice, really, really luscious bass tones. So let's see if we can hear a little listen. This is actually an excerpt from Ravel's Mother Goose when we're talking about the Beauty and the Beast. So the contrabassoon, I'm going to play the full excerpt for you because it's so short. This is the Beast in Beauty and the Beast.
And we are playing Mother Goose Suite next year.
Oh, look at that.
Yeah. September.
Wrote a suite called Mother Goose Suite. And in one of the movements, there's the Beauty and the Beast. The contrabassoon, of course, plays the beast.
You just gotta love the contrabassoon. It's just so like,
It's so unique. Yeah.
it is. Absolutely, yeah. Okay, so we just listened to a contrabassoon excerpt. So now I have some bassoon excerpts for you. So I'm gonna stop share so you can see me in profile a little bit. Let's see if I should back up just a little bit so you can get a little bit more of the bassoon in here. The first excerpt that I'm going to play is by a French composer, Paul Ducat. He wrote a symphonic poem in 1897 called The Sorcerer's Apprentice. It's actually based on a ballad by Goethe. And you might recognize this piece because it was very prominently featured in a 1940s film by a gentleman named Walt Disney, Fantasia. So I hope you enjoy a little Sorcerer's Apprentice.
That is not an easy piece to play, not just for the bassoons, but for the entire orchestra. It's a very difficult piece.
It's a very difficult piece. It's so fun though. Like, so I'll take the difficulty.
Yes.
The next excerpt that I have for you is actually an opera excerpt. I think as some of you were joining, we were talking a little bit about my love for opera. Is actually based my DM dissertation was based all rooted in opera. So this is a classical opera, Elixir of Love by Gaetano Donizetti, an Italian composer. It's from the opera The Elixir of Love. It was written in 1832. And basically it's a story of unrequited love, and where the bassoon solo comes in is basically the male lead, Nemorino. He finally he realizes that Adrina, she does love him. So this is the aria in which he now sees it, that she does care for him, she does love him. And so the title of this aria is Una furtiva lagrima, a furtive tear.
That's beautiful.
It's probably, the Una furtiva lagrima is probably one of the most famous tenor arias. So after the bassoon entrance, all of a sudden we were joined by the tenor, who will go on to sing about how Adrina, she does love him now. The last excerpt, the orchestra excerpt that I'm going to play for you, is actually by a gentleman, Nikolai Rimsky-Korsakov. And this is a symphonic poem that's based on 101 Nights, the kind of Middle Eastern folk tales from his composition Scheherazade. And the solo I'm going to be playing is from the second movement, the Calendar Prince. So the passage opens with a kind of beautiful, lush, kind of virtuosic violin, and then all of a sudden the bassoon will take over the thematic material.
Love it. I cannot wait to play Scheherazade next year. We're playing it on our September concert.
Yes, it's so fun, so challenging and demanding, and it's like such a fun story to be, you know, to kind of
It is.
in
Yeah.
to the weave of the story, of the weave of the tale. It's just so fun.
We'll have to do an OLLI presentation specifically on Scheherazade, I think.
Yes, absolutely.
I love that idea.
Well, the solo that I have prepared for you today is actually by a Brazilian composer. His name is Francisco Mignone. He is probably one of the most premier Brazilian composers of the 20th century. He really championed Brazilian nationalism music, really infusing his compositions with Brazilian idioms and kind of the folk styles, as well as like rhythms and kind of just the essence of Brazilian music. And so the solo that I'm going to play for you today is from a collection of 16 valses for the bassoon, so 16 waltzes. They're really kind of short and they're just really fun to play, and they each have kind of their own kind of idea or expression, kind of story that they're telling. So the waltz that I'm going to play for you today is a mochina, and the title of it basically translates to is the mochina that Villa didn't write. So Mignone is kind of poking fun at Villalobos a little bit here and kind of joining the mochina composition world a little bit. This excerpt it can be a little sad and just really a lot of emotion with it. So I hope you enjoy.
That was beautiful. So we also featured her for one of our upcoming musician profile videos that we videoed at the Swope, and she played another one of the waltzes from that book in that video. So we hope to release that soon in the coming weeks.
Awesome.
Well, this has been wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us, Sara. I'd like to open it up for questions from the group. And since we have a smaller group, feel free to unmute your mic if you have a question.
So how much does one of those bassoons cost?
Oh,
A good one.
a good one. Our instruments can range anywhere from about $6,000 or $7,000 upward to $80,000 or $90,000.
Oh my goodness. Do you make your own reeds?
I do, yes. I probably spend more time sometimes making reeds than I actually do playing the bassoon or practicing. It's so instrumental in our sound production and has such a big impact on our tone and how we're able to project and how we're able to facilitate between the different registers and kind of articulations and what have you. So they're very important, and being able to work on them myself allows for greater control.
And Dick wants to know, how long does a reed last?
That actually kind of depends on how much you're playing, how much you're using it a little bit. It also can depend on your rotation. So let me show you my reed case. So if I show you my reed case, I've got a bunch in there. So we're never working with just one reed, or we shouldn't be working with just one reed at a time. We should kind of be rotating between them. So kind of the more that you can rotate your reeds, the better. Also, ventilation really helps. It's a natural material, so it's wood, so it does mold. It does get kind of not so nice. So there comes a point where sometimes you do just have to say goodbye to a reed because its longevity is no longer there. I will probably take about a week in the forming process. So when we're starting with kind of like the blank slate, like with tube cane, you do the forming process and everything. Once I clip a reed and I start working on the final like finishing scrapes or so, probably takes anywhere between 2 to 5 days, maybe sometimes a week to kind of break in. And then I'm hopeful if I can get 1 to 2 weeks out of a reed, even when I'm rotating between 3 or 4.
Yeah, that's right.
That is one thing that clarinetists do not envy, is oboists and bassoonists having to make your own reeds. There are some clarinets that do venture into the art of reed making, but they've mastered commercial grade clarinet reeds, so that's where I'll stick for now.
And because it is such a time heavy, like it just takes so much time, and it can be an investment as well. There are a lot of like music purveyors that do provide reeds at different stages. So sometimes the cane will already be processed for you, or the blank will be made. So we call a blank when there isn't a clip. So as we're looking at the reed like now, we would call this a clipped reed because you can actually play into it. So when the reed is first formed, it's sealed. So you kind of have to cut that seal. And so there are music stores that will sell just a blank. So then all you have to do is the clipping. There's some that are kind of kind of finished for you, or even fully finished. So it's all, how much time do you have? Do you want to invest in it? Reed making is still something that I still have time for, and that I actually really enjoy doing. There's kind of like dare I say, like a therapeutic aspect to it, of like the whittling away of the cane and kind of testing things out, and really, not every piece of cane or every reed is the same. So it really kind of jogs my my brain at times, trying to figure out, why is this piece not working and this one is, or that one's not. So a lot of just kind of exercise the mind a little bit, which is nice.
Have you ever thought about experimenting with other woods for the reed?
I believe there are some bassoonists that are doing. I'm not quite sure like what other wood that they're using. There are folks that are experimenting with non-wood reeds. So we have like there's a company, Leger, who's making plastic reeds to kind of help, and they're more kind of closer to the wooden model than kind of the stereotypical kind of plastic reed. I personally have never gotten into experimenting. There's so many other things you can experiment. There's different shape sizes. So, you know, we've got this flare. How wide or how narrow that flare is, how wide or narrow is the tube of the actual reed. Those are things that I like to experiment with more than the actual cane itself.
Leger makes, and it's high quality plastic. You know, when we say plastic, we think, oh, plastic. No, it's like really high quality plastic. They also make clarinet reeds as well. And one of my former professors at IU, James Campbell, was a Leger artist and would actually work directly with Leger and would have custom made plastic reeds. And he eventually, I think, just swore off wooden reeds altogether.
Yeah. Now, I know, like, even, you know, not the necessarily Leger reeds, but I know for a lot of like younger clarinetists or saxophonists, especially in like marching band, where like things can get damaged so easily in marching band that sometimes that's actually being recommended. And then when they go into the concert band setting, then they'll return to their cane reeds.
Right. Yeah.
Bassoon is not a marching band instrument.
It is not. Neither is oboe.
Neither is oboe. There are some, you know, there are some bands that try to do things with bassoon, and it's typically just not an instrument that is in a marching band. It's just not on the field.
It's too heavy, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah.
It's a little bit heavy. Also, just kind of the sonority of it a little bit. It's buzzy. I mean, we've got these two reeds that are vibrating and buzzing together. So sometimes the core quality of the sound is just a buzz, and you're not hearing that depth or that warmth. And I think a lot of that just has to do, you know, kind of being outside, kind of moving around. It also feels a little dangerous to me to be walking around with a metal pipe that, yeah, sorry.
Well, speaking of height, how much does it weigh? Have you weighed the thing?
My bassoon weighs probably.
Oh, there's that probably stuff again. Put it on the scales and let's find out.
I'd have to go run to the other room to go weigh it. We're looking probably at about 8 to 10 pounds, which is probably heavier than most bassoons. The boot that I showed you here, mine is double lined. So I've got lining on what is the smaller side, and then it lines all the way around here. A lot of bassoons, they're only lined on the one side, the side, like the narrower side that we're blowing the airstream into. So if I can show you, kind of stand up. So if the air is going through the vocal, it's going down this side. And so this side is the side that receives the condensation. And so then at the bottom of the boot is where the water pools. And so this side traditionally is unlined, so it would be exposed wood. A lot of instrument manufacturers, they're starting to line this side of the instrument, so when you disassemble, if water gets to this side, then the wood won't get damp, it won't get moist, which would cause a type of rotting. We call it boot rot. You're probably very familiar if you go on hikes around the woods and you see kind of damaged, fallen over trees. That's what happens on the inside of the instrument. So because of that, this weighs a little bit extra. I also have a lot more keys and gizmos, a lot of those extras that just kind of add to the weight of it.
Let me ask you about the evolution, because you didn't get into the real specifics, but how long do you know, or do you have any idea how long it might have taken for the people who discovered it to build the wing to help the bassoonist?
That's a great question for an acoustician. I think someone who deals with acoustics, they think that's a lot, you know, when you're talking about the boring or you're talking about, you know, the actual like building of it. I'm thinking like of the precursors. I'm not exactly quite sure. And I've never actually asked like how long does it take to go from, you know, when they receive the slices of maple to get to our finished product. I've never asked that.
I understand that, but I'm thinking, who conceived the idea? Do you have any idea who or when that might have happened?
So unfortunately, no. The history, the development of the bassoon, it's a little obscure because a lot of what we have just comes from pictures. We do have, you know, written documents that, you know, but they're kind of unreliable. So definitely something, you know, a good rabbit hole research question to kind of continue to look down a little bit. Unfortunately, I just don't have that answer for you today.
Well, let Samantha do that. She's our EP after all. She knows all this stuff.
I had a question though. I thought that was so interesting when you were showing us the video of the Dulcian. like I wasn't expecting the piece that you showed us to be so soloistic, and I figured, oh, Dulcian continuo instrument, it's just going to play all those bass notes with the harpsichord and the cellos, and that's all they'll do. So was that common for the Dulcian to kind of have a solo role in quite a bit of music back then?
Well, I mean, primarily, yes, it was used as a supporting instrument, that kind of that cohort family, the instrument family to be used. But there were some composers that were very inspired, or perhaps maybe there was a particular Dulcian player who just had the technique, and the composer and the player got together and they were able to write a work, and they kind of collaborated and fed off of each other, kind of like a muse, so to speak. And I think that's, especially in the early times, I think that's why we have a lot more of those soloistic pieces, is because a player of the time was able to do it. He was able to have that technique to play soloistically. And we're very grateful for that. But yes, traditionally the Dulcians, they are more continuo instruments, but not out of the realm of possibility of playing soloistically at all, as we saw with the Bodecker.
Yeah, I enjoyed learning about that. That was interesting to me.
Your instrument.
Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead, please.
Your instrument and you produced a beautiful vibrato, and I wonder, how do you do that?
The vibrato is produced by the airstream, kind of manipulating the airstream, kind of pulsating it. So as a young musician, we work on constant airstream and kind of developing that line, constant flow. Once a solid airstream foundation has been established, as well as pitch recognition, able to stabilize the pitch, then we'll introduce vibrations, because the vibrating is a manipulation of the pitch. And if we don't have a good foundation, we don't know what we're changing. So set up the good foundation, and then we manipulate it. And I manipulate it with kind of my core and obliques kind of down here. So it's kind of like a pulsating kind of action.
You don't want to use your lips in a double reed, because that's going to choke the reed, right?
It can, yeah. I mean, there are some instances where sometimes you have to, sometimes you get in a do or die situation, and that's what you have to do. But the core richness that I'm looking for, I manipulate the airstream in order to get the vibrato vibrating. Which
oboists do. I mean, flute players, of course, would do. They don't have any other choice. When I do vibrato, I don't do vibrato that much. It really only comes up if we're playing like a pops concert or jazz. There's a few clarinetists out there that do use vibrato tastefully on the clarinet, but typically we don't use vibrato, and I use my lips just because I need to create it quickly and I don't have time to sit and practice the air support that is needed to create the airstream for vibrato that you guys do.
How many people major in bassoon? I mean, you see more clarinets, you see more flutes, that kind of thing.
That's a good question. I don't know if I have a number like nationwide, like how many bassoon majors there are out there. A lot of it.
Use IU as an example.
Okay, so IU as an example, that probably is, that's a big example.
How many students are in the bassoon studio?
Yeah, so the bassoon studio at IU can accommodate anywhere between 24 to 30. And that's on the larger side. And a lot of that has to do with size of school and the number of ensembles. So IU has 3 bands, it has 5 orchestras, it has a new music ensemble, it has an HP historical performance where we do have Baroque and classical ensembles as well. So we have the ensemble load that you need that many bassoonists, anywhere between 2 to 4 in an ensemble, either orchestra or band. It's typically 2 to 3. Some pieces will require 4. But there might be some music programs that don't have that many, where ensembles. I'm thinking of my master's at DePaul. At the time when I was studying there were, I believe, 2 bands, and then there was 1 orchestra or 2 orchestras and 1 string orchestra and a new music ensemble. In the bassoon studio, we maxed out at like 8 or 9. So it can kind of fluctuate, I think, just depending on size of the school and the number of ensembles. Yeah.
Any other
out
questions? All right. Well, thank you, Sarah, for joining us today. I really enjoy hearing all my colleagues talk about their instruments because I learned so much from everybody. And it's nice to get to know my colleagues. It's nice to introduce them to all of you guys, our longtime supporters. So thank you, Sarah, for joining us today. I'll give a quick plug. We have our principal flute, Joyce Wilson. She's going to share the flute on May 25th. And I think, Michelle, she's going to be in person, right? She'll be presenting in the recital hall, but we'll have a Zoom option.
Yes. So you will be in the great big huge recital hall in order to see Joyce in person if you want to do that. And if you want to do it more as a distance program, we are going to be offering that through Zoom. So you can do it either way. But we're hoping for a decent turnout for in person since we're going to be in that great big huge room and the acoustics will be perfect. So
we should
join us for that.
Yeah.
And then in June, we're going to have our principal keyboardist, Tim Stevenson, come and let me look up what date that was. I think it's the week of June. I think it's June 8th. And he's going to talk about not just the piano, but the other keyboard instruments that he often plays, like the celesta, which or Harry Potter if it's not played on the bells. And then at the end of June, I'm going to give a preview of our upcoming 21-22 season, Sight, Sounds, and Stories. So we'll talk a little bit about Scheherazade and Mother Goose and Amy Beach Gaelic Symphony and Brahms Symphony No. 1, all kinds of repertoire that we're going to play next season. And then as we get into July and August, we'll probably go down to one presentation a month until we get back into the season. And we're going to start introducing some topics about repertoire that we're going to be playing in the next season. And then also topics of interest that our musicians request to share. So we have one musician, Jennifer Kirby. She's our English horn player. She is a early music specialist, and she has asked if she could present something on ancient music, which I think is really interesting. So we'll have her over in sometime in 2021. So thank you, everybody. I hope you all have a wonderful weekend. The weather's supposed to be really nice. So bye, everybody.
Thanks for having me, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.